This is Eldrazi Skyspawner, a common, draft chaff that might just make the cut in your limited deck. Not a card you expect to be in a constructed deck. Not a good one, anyway. Not one that runs the tables at a Pro Tour. A modern Pro Tour. So how did this card end up in the deck that took down Pro Tour Oath of the Gatewatch? Magic sets go through a lot of work. Design, testing, tweaking, playtesting, revisions. It takes a long time to take a set from conception to release. Gavin Verhey, senior designer at Wizards of the Coast, knows this process well. He was on the development team for the set.
So I helped kind of fine-tune the set a little bit. What happened is design worked for many months to come up with the initial ideas. For example, using colorless mana, kind of the rough themes, and then they handed their file off to Ian Duke, the lead designer of the set, or lead developer of the set, and then we spent about 6 months or so play testing it, making new cards, making tweaks, and getting the set into fighting shape.
One aspect of design and development that's important to remember is that Modern and formats like it aren't always considered in the process.
We mostly focus on Standard and Limited. We'll occasionally go test other formats if we feel like there's a reason to. I think that we do a lot is we talk about other formats. We kind of theory craft what might be good, what might not be good, that kind of thing. And it's funny, actually, with Oath of the Gatewatch, we did talk about, you could play this with Eye of Ugin, wouldn't that be cool and clever? And we kind of thought about it a little bit. I know Ian Duke considered it when he was making his decisions, but no one thought that the Eldrazi deck was going to break out.
The set introduced some new ideas, and after a lot of work in the Washington-based offices of Wizards, was ready to be released.
I felt like we were pretty happy with the set. We thought it was a good follow-up to Battle for Zendikar. It released a brand new mechanic, this kind of colorless mana, which is in a way a sixth color Magic had never seen before. So we were able to make a bunch of pretty wild cards. And while we were a little nervous because we'd never done colorless mana before, this is putting a lot of really interesting stuff happening into this colorless mana symbol, and we had Waste in there, which was a brand new basic land. On the whole, we were pretty happy with what came out in the set.
The immediate reaction to the set's release certainly didn't seem to indicate anything threatening for the Modern format. That didn't stop players from testing versions of the deck, though, mostly splashing black.
Basically, these three guys tested the Eldrazi deck, which basically was like put 4 Eye of Ugin, 4 Eldrazi Temple, and all of the new Eldrazi that just came out in Oath of the Gatewatch. And at first, because they sent me their list, and I tried it, and I'm like, well, this deck doesn't do anything if you don't have Eye of Ugin or Eldrazi Temple. So I'm not sure that's like a reliable or consistent deck. So, I'm really not sure. But when you do draw them, it's pretty broken. So I'll keep an eye on it. But I was like 3 weeks before the Pro Tour, I was pretty set on playing Affinity.
While Pascal Maynard was finding that the right card combination could give the deck some explosive games, other discoveries were being made, like Caleb Durward's biggest takeaway from testing blue-black Eldrazi.
The big takeaway that you should have gotten from those 5 matches is that Drowner of Hope is insane.
Still, it wasn't clear at all that the deck was ready to compete in a stable, powerful format with established decks. For a player less familiar with the format like Jiachen JC Tao, finding ways to use new cards could offer the element of surprise.
Probably partially due to my unfamiliarity with Modern, I just thought that the new cards would, if there were something that's truly out there from the new set release, that would put me at more of an equal or even advantage footing than exploring current or pre-existing established decks, where I felt like I was probably going to be more of an underdog. As far as my team goes, I was the first person to really spend all my time coming up with a list. The list had been there were a lot of sort of Eldrazi processor lists going around the Magic Online by that time. So what I did was I start off with that list, played a bunch, thought it was a little bit clunky and it was a little bit too reactive. And all this while I was testing variations of blue-black, black-red. So we were all stuck on the mindset of needing black to make the deck work. And one day I thought, what if we just cut black and try black-red? And my teammate Ben Wise was just immediately in love with that idea, so we kept tinkering with the blue-red version of the deck. and the two of us eventually fine-tuned it to the list that we took to the PT.
Pro Tour Oath of the Gatewatch happened 2 weeks after the set's release. Not a huge amount of testing time with the new cards, but with several members of Team East-West Bowl on the Eldrazi deck already, clearly some players saw the potential. Just not very many.
I'll be honest, I didn't think a format like Modern could be broken at that point. I thought there was too many different archetypes, it was way too well explored.
There are lots of decks that are comparatively well established, so something showing up that's completely new, especially that leans so heavily on the like lots of cards from one set, is pretty unusual. Like, it happens from time to time, but it's certainly not the run-of-the-mill. So yeah, we knew that there was going to be a swathe of decks that were using Ivugin and working alongside lots of fast mana to be able to do cool things with Eldrazi, but I don't think that we necessarily were like, yes, this is going to be a metagame-defining deck for sure on day one, and I think that that's probably kind of in line with how a lot of the players felt.
One of those decks was of course the list JC was playing, a list he didn't have full confidence in.
You know, it's just so hard to tell when you have something that is actually good in Modern. Every deck is capable of winning on turn 3 or turn 4, so it's difficult to tell whether your deck is anything truly special or if it's just another deck out there, you know, among other 20, 30 other okay decks.
Not only was the list unknown and not hugely tested, it was full of cards that wouldn't look out of place in a draft deck.
Yeah, it was definitely really fun to show the deck off to people and have them not understand at all what the deck is trying to do. That part was great. It was hilarious. I would say I had very little expectations. I mean, you're like taking an unknown deck to a large tournament is always going to be nervous. But for me, I've put in so much time into the deck that at least I was confident I could play the deck and pilot it to the best of my abilities. So that was reassuring.
Early into the constructed rounds of PT Oath, it became clear that the Eldrazi decks were more than just a cool new archetype. The coverage team began to realize just how good it was. Tim Willoughby was on the team for that event and remembers how it emerged.
In general, picking feature match at the Pro Tour is kind of a mix of let's get some cool decks, let's get some players that people identify with and people like, and try and do as much of that as we can for as long as we can and err on the side of people that are winning a lot. So gradually, over the course of the Pro Tour, the number of people that are just winning every round diminishes, as one might expect, each and every turn. And so, yeah, once you hit a point where you look at the top tables, you're like, wow, there's a lot of this new deck here. You begin to get a feel for it being, quote-unquote, the best deck.
The players were noticing, too.
Our team had the blue-red one, and Chow Fireball had the colorless one, which was way better than the blue-red one that we had, but was still like, you know, just the shell was broken, so it didn't really matter.
But as day one drew to a close, it wasn't quite apparent just how good the deck was. Yet.
Well, the Eldrazi deck is just extremely consistent. It is capable of doing a ton of damage, so the weakness of the combo decks in Modern is that sometimes they just die to their own draws. You know, if you have a mulligan or two, or if you don't draw all the pieces you need, then the Eldrazi deck can really punish that. And then also we were aware of the deck's weaknesses, so post-board we get to bring in a lot of counter spells and a bunch of additional interaction. I personally felt like it was a good deck that was catching people by surprise. I didn't think it was ban-worthy.
Oh man, and Zhao Qiantao stays undefeated with his crazy Eldrazi deck. 8-0 day one of the Pro Tour. Lewandowski's going to have to settle for a rock-solid 7-1 start, though. Great stuff from both of these, but I got to say, crazy to see this deck playing these cards I played in Limited last night.
That's right.
In Modern.
Yeah.
And he's just smashing everybody with it, 8-0.
As the Day 2 metagame was revealed, it was obvious that the Eldrazi decks were a cut above the rest of the field. They put a lot of players into Day 2.
Glance, it doesn't change all that much. Affinity 1, Burn 2, Eldrazi 3, Infect 4, but
Look at that right-hand column. That is the percentage of players who chose to run that deck that made it to day 2. So what you actually...
The Channel Fireball version of the deck was particularly potent. It had game against almost everything.
By far the most interesting thing, brand new deck, barely existed before, but now it's crushing the field. These are the core cards that all of those Eldrazi decks seem to have in common. Everybody has Eye of Ugin Eldrazi Temple. Those are your, 2-mana lands, you kind of call them. Throw an Orborg in play, and Eye of Ugin taps for 3 mana, sort of. And then the Eldrazi...
Basically, it was the breakout deck of the tournament, and everyone was playing catch-up. The only deck that went over the top of the aggressive colorless list Channel Fireball ran was JC Tao's red-blue deck.
Let's take a look at some of the cards in the deck. Let's see what makes it work. Let's take a look at some of the new creatures that were added into the format in Oath of the Gatewatch. Talk to me first about Eldrazi Mimic, JC.
This is one of the best early plays you can make.
Watching the event play out, Gavin Verhey went through a range of emotions. As part of the team who made the set, seeing new cards in play is great, right?
It's really cool to have a Pro Tour and have a brand new deck break out using cards from the newest set, especially in Modern. And this was kind of a weird case because normally our Pro Tours were standard Pro Tours, which will of course feature the newest set. But this was a Modern Pro Tour. It was kind of, late in the season. We thought, hey, we'll have a Modern Pro Tour. And actually, the newest set showed up a ton, which at first was really exciting. Hey, there's this new Eldrazi deck. Some people are playing it. That's really cool. It's a brand new thing. We'll see how this little fringe deck does. And then we heard more and more, oh, this deck is everywhere. Oh, this deck is doing really well. Oh, this deck is winning a lot. And that's when we knew we might have a problem on our hands.
For the casting team, though, something new is not expected from a format like Modern, and it's exciting, too.
So when I started seeing this happen, and not only did they break it, but another team broke it, and it was like these two versions floating to the top, and I was like, I never thought we'd see this for Modern. I was shocked. Seriously, it's only happened a couple times. The only other time I can remember is with Lantern. This is what I want to see. I want to see professional teams push the boundaries and kind of test the fences like velociraptors, and then boom, break through and get there. I want to see that, right? That's part of the dream of constructed Magic is I might break it. I might be the one to figure out something that nobody else did and get my weekend where I have the technology that they don't. So when I saw it, I'm like, that is awesome. Slay everybody because they could have worked harder or tried more stuff and they didn't. And so for me, no mercy. I loved it.
The final standings after day 2 painted a less rosy picture for any deck without an Eye of Ugin. But for JC Tao, it didn't matter.
In 8th place, with 36 match points from the United States, JC Tao!
He had made it into the last spot in top 8 alongside 5 other Eldrazi players. The other 2 decks were Affinity. Colorless Mana was totally dominant. The quarterfinals would see Pascal Maynard's Affinity list fall along with 3 of the Eldrazi decks. In the semis, JC with the red-blue Eldrazi deck, a relative unknown with a deck of ostensibly bad cards that just happened to work well together, would face Luis Scott Vargas of Team Channel Fireball, playing the colorless Eldrazi deck that also landed Ivan Flock in the last 4. The only non-Eldrazi deck left at this point was Patrick Diekman's Affinity list. It was clear Eldrazi were dominant, and by most accounts the colorless version was better.
The colorless version, I thought it was genius. I thought that was the most broken deck that I've ever seen at a tournament, in my opinion.
But it had a weakness that JC was able to exploit to take down his more experienced opponents.
They were just super explosives, and nobody really had hate, so they didn't have to be resilient or anything. The blue version had Sky Spawners and Drowner of Hopes, which made the deck actually decent in the mirror. It was actually favored against the colorless version, but obviously they didn't know that coming in. They had no idea nobody else would play it.
On the other semi-final table, Flock's colorless Eldrazi list took down Affinity.
He's going to steal the 4-4, and everybody's in. Luis Scott Vargas extends the hand. JC Tao is our first finalist. So
that led JC to a 3rd match in the top 8 in a row against colorless Eldrazi. The result felt inevitable even against a player of Flock's caliber. The final match of the event, fittingly, was Eldrazi on Eldrazi. Blue-red draft chaff versus colorless big beater aggro. It was never in doubt for JC. By this point, he had enough experience of the colorless Eldrazi deck to beat it with relative ease, and to take down the Pro Tour, with a deck that at a glance looks absolutely ridiculous.
This could be it, and that's it. JC Tao is our champion. He wins. Blue-red Eldrazi are the winners here at Pro Tour Oath of the Gatewatch. Yvonne Flock is going to have to settle for a second.
Even in his winner's interview, JC was humble, even surprised by the deck's success.
At what point do you start letting the thought of holding that trophy and getting that check creep into your mind?
Never.
Never, not even in the finals?
No.
It was a breakout tournament for Eldrazi, but even after putting 6 decks in the top 8, even after the finals being Eldrazi versus Eldrazi, it was unclear what the deck's lasting impact would actually be.
And an amazing performance by the Eldrazi. Maybe Grand Prix Bologna, Detroit, and Melbourne will have something to say about that in a few weeks' time.
Behind the scenes, questions were already being asked about the raw power of Eldrazi.
I was commentating in the booth with Ian Duke at the time, who worked in R&D and was actually one of the point guys on Oath of the Gatewatch. And there were lots of conversations about, is this too good? Can things change?
Rich Hagan asked the question about the future of the Eldrazi deck at the end of Pro Tour Oath of the Gatewatch, and the next 3 modern GPs definitively answered. Eldrazi were everywhere. At Grand Prix Bologna, Melbourne, and Detroit all played on the same weekend in March, the metagame had developed around a blue-white version of the deck, which appeared to be its ultimate evolution. Eldrazi made up 40% of Day 2 decks, and out of 24 top 8 decks across 3 tournaments, Eldrazi took 14 of those spots, with 6 of them in Detroit. Ironically, the only event of the 3 that Eldrazi didn't win, with Abzan Company somehow coming out on top. It didn't matter much. With 40% of the Magic Online metagame playing Eldrazi and players skipping modern events to avoid the Eldrazi menace, Eldrazi Winter was in full swing. Until WotC stepped in. On April 4th, 2016, Eye of Ugin was banned and Eldrazi Winter turned into spring. Modern was saved, and players breathed a collective sigh of relief. Reality unsmashed. But how does that happen? How does a broken mechanic manage to appear and utterly dominate the metagame of an established format without being noticed by Wizards of the Coast?
This happens every handful of years. I remember Elves at Pro Tour Berlin, where it was the worst kept secret. Everyone thought no one else knew, and everyone brought their elf deck, and it was absolutely wild. And to me, this is another example of that happening again. And where this happens the most is when you have a set that's really high synergy, and it has a lot of synergy with itself or with the very specific old cards. Elves, a great example of this, you had Nettle Sentinel and Heritage Druid right next to each other. There hadn't really been a lot of extended play at the time. Turns out both those cards were ridiculous with everything else that was going on, and turned a bunch of otherwise not very good elves into a deck that continues to be strong even in Legacy, and of course has had cards banned out of it in Modern. And with the Eldrazi in Oath of the Gatewatch, you had for this brand new mechanic showing up, which let you use this swath of cards from the past in a brand new way, which is really exciting and really wonderful, but ultimately a little too powerful. So I think this could happen again, and what you should always be looking for are those high synergy things, those kind of new things that show up together at the same time that combine with something older that people maybe weren't thinking about as much, or a powerful engine that was just waiting for a home. Because we all know that lands that tap for 2 mana are incredibly strong. I mean, Ancient Tomb, City of Traders, even ones with pretty big drawbacks have had to be, restricted or banned in the past. Eldrazi Temple was a card that was kind of just waiting for that to happen, just waiting for something to show up that tilted the game on its head, and Oath of the Gatewatch did exactly that.
So, knowing these things can go wrong and that testing online can accelerate discoveries like the Eldrazi deck, how did things change?
I think that if we're looking for things that it changed, I do think that it was one of the straws that led to the development of the play design team within WotC.
One person who would end up working at Wizards, helping to design the game and hopefully avoid these situations happening again, was JC Tao. But do we want that? As spectators, casual players, or even tournament grinders, do we want to see things break now and again? And will it happen again?
I don't think it happens that often. I think it's extraordinarily difficult in Modern. I think there's a tendency for new cards to come out, and make a broken deck possible, but those are much more visible than like what they did, right? Like when you find these sort of weird cards and this like, okay, we've put this whole thing together using some old cards, some new cards, and do a thing, that's different. For this one, for anything new like that, sure, I do think we'll see it again. I just think it's rare.
Perhaps not. Now that the information is just so readily available across all of the formats that it's just difficult to not only break the format, but because of the increase in talent in the Wizards play design team, it's just also less likely to be true.
Broken things happening is cool on occasion. It's just a matter of we don't want it to be the norm. We don't want people to look at Magic and be like, oh yeah, that's the game where someone draws better and wins on the third turn or whatnot, and it all just comes down to whether or not you've cracked this awesome one card. If there's lots of different cards that you can do cool things with, and there's maybe something that is the big baddie that you can plan against a little bit, I don't think that's so bad a thing.
And what does Gavin Verhey think about another potential Eldrazi Winter coming because of things Wizards miss?
There's a careful balance to strike. Because when you're doing something for the first time, you want it to be awesome. You want people to see it, you want them to put it into their decks, you want it to be brand new and exciting. At the same time, it's possible Colorless Mana took it too far, although I will say, in Standard, I think it ended up working out pretty well. You know, you saw some of these cards in decks, and some cool things happening, and some splashing occurring, but it wasn't omnipresent like it was in Modern. So, we did make some tweaks in retrospect, and I think we've learned a lot about how to make these packages of synergy to make sure that they don't just explode with older cards. But, I'll be honest, someday, this probably will happen again. 5, 6, 10 years from now, who knows? It could be next set, it could be in 20 sets. And when that happens, I'll be happy that we still tried pushing the envelope and trying something new. And ultimately, Modern has a lot of cards in it. Legacy has a lot of cards in it. And if something breaks and we can try and fix it. We shouldn't intentionally try and break anything, but if we have to push a little bit or if there's an uninteracted combination, we can always take action if we need to.
And maybe there's a good reason for the envelope to be pushed. Maybe that's part of what makes Magic amazing. That things can change, that they can be broken.
I quite like it when every now and again you get the moment that either a lone wolf or an up-and-coming team finds something no one else does. Because like, that's a kind of a cool message, right? Like, I like the notion that one person might find a cool deck and ride it to a Pro Tour win, because that means that any of us could do it, which would be pretty ace.
Even as we might look back and be glad the Eldrazi deck is gone, there's always another side of the coin for Magic players.
I think they will definitely remember the Eldrazi deck. They will hopefully also remember the fact that even in a format as strong and varied as Modern, there's still the opportunity for someone to really break the format and maybe hopefully look to that as an inspiration for when they play their next Magic tournament.